Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar about attention and attention units. And welcome, obviously, also to Publicis Groupe here in Brussels, Belgium. Great to have you all here. I am pretty sure that who is watching right now would agree with the fact that we are living in one of the most fantastic moments in the history of advertising, of content creation, of messaging, etc. So much content, so much fantastic content has been created, sometimes a bit less fantastic. Anyway, a lot of content over the last month and over the last years. And obviously, a lot of content means also that it becomes more and more challenging to get the attention of the people that we need. Because in the end, we are human beings. We are still human beings. Human beings means that we have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 brain, and obviously 24 hours per day. And sometimes we need to sleep. So it becomes really challenging to get the attention, to get the focus of the people that we need, because that's indeed what it deserves, the great, fantastic content that we have produced, but also that it's needed in order to be effective. Effectiveness that is high in the agenda here at Publicis Groupe. So that's all great. So we're going to talk to you about how can we implement or how can we create a new metric? How can we be doing better in the future? Within attention and within attention units. We have today a fantastic lineup for you. So within a minute, Mark Goldman will kick off with his keynote. So Mark Goldman is the CEO and is also the founder of Adelaide and also the Council of Attention. And he is going to talk to you about the importance of attention in the media ecosystem. After that, Carl will talk to you about the notion of the attention unit. And if you think that this is all theoretical and that nothing has been into the practice, no, you're wrong. Obviously, we did some trackings here at Publicis Groupe, local level in Belgium. We did trackings over the last 6 months, many campaigns, millions of impressions have been tracked on the attention units. And Benoit from Publicis Groupe will give you the first insights, the first observations that we have made about that. So after Benoit, there will be an intervention from Mike from Lumen, who was also going to talk you through the observations that he made more from a publisher platform network. And great stuff at the end. We're going to have a round table debate. Zach from Adelaide is going to moderate that round table, and we have fantastic guests in this webinar. First of all, we have Aurore de Vos from the Walt Disney Company. We have Matthias Langenaker from Publicis Groupe, and also have Bernd from DPG Media, who will give their ideas about the importance indeed of having a new metric, this attention unit in the market, and how attention indeed can be better or can be lead to a more effective strategy and more effective media plan. So that's all great. I wish you a very nice, inspiring moment here during this webinar. You're going to see attention units, the golden bridge between the typical media metrics and the typical brand metrics. It's something new on the Belgian market. It's going to be fantastic. Also, I want to highlight the fact that this is a kick-off of a long-term project, right? So we did the first 6 months of observations. Obviously, we're going to continue tracking that to have more fine and more optimized results. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to Publicis Groupe. Wish you a fantastic, inspiring moments, and I give the word to Mark. Mark, up to you.
Thank you very much, Sasha, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the Attention Dimension. Thanks for coming today. My name is Mark Goldman. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Adelaide and one of the co-founders of the Attention Council. The Attention Council is a group of companies that have come together to advance the use of attention metrics. We have members who are agencies and brands and vendors in the market. And I think the most exciting thing that's happened in attention metrics is just the increased usage. So we've actually seen over the past year, 3 times the amount of brands reporting that they're using attention metrics to optimize or buy media. So we're seeing a lot of adoption, and I'm here today to share information about how to best use attention metrics, how to optimize media, how to buy media, and some of the nuances and pitfalls with attention metrics. So getting started, the reason that I'm here today and the reason that attention metrics are so important is that media has never been more fragmented. we're coming from a place where there was maybe, a dozen formats or so, and people saw a couple thousand impressions, to a world where there might be a dozen different formats on a single web page, right? And there's tens of thousands of impressions that are seen by people every day. The problem is that the metrics that that advertisers have at their disposal today don't really address this fragmentation. Things like viewability or video completion rate don't do a good job of representing the quality of media placements. And so what we've started to see in the market very early on with attention metrics is the use of duration. And so duration can be a couple of different things. Duration could be, how long is the ad on screen for? It could be how long a video plays, or, if you're using eye tracking, it could be the gaze duration, or how long someone's looking at something. So duration's a really good first attempt at this. I'm going to unpack a couple of the nuances when you're using duration, things to look out for, and ways that you can get a little bit better. The first that I want to talk about is viewable duration. And so this is just sort of like the use of viewability technology to measure not only was an ad 50% on screen for 1 second, but how long was it on screen for? How was it 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds? So in a placement that is adjacent to content on the left here, something we call like a smaller placement, the duration of viewability is largely an indication of the quality of the content, right? So when someone is more engaged with content, the ad will be on screen for a little bit longer. This is a good signal, and that can predict the likelihood of attention. There's a lot of other things that go into a good model, but it's, you can definitely use duration on screen for placements to predict the likelihood of attention. When you have larger placements and things that are like we call politely interruptive placements, where the consumer is in control of how long the ad is viewable for, or how long it plays for, that's largely an indication of the quality of the creative. And when we have large placements that are forced play, like with countdown timers, those become, I think the duration metrics in that case are largely predictive of how much people like the content, and how much advertising they're willing to tolerate in order to see more of the content. So now let's think about duration as in gaze duration. So if we can measure the amount of time that someone is actually looking at something, that's a little bit different than viewable duration. And gaze duration is typically measured with eye tracking devices. And in this case, what we see is that there is a decreasing incremental value of seconds when we're measuring gaze duration. So the third and fourth and fifth seconds are each worth less than the previous one. So this is really important to consider if you're thinking about transacting on gaze duration. So let's think about how we can move a little bit beyond duration. If we can start to unpack attention metrics to look at the different factors that contribute to attention. I think the most important learning that we have at Adelaide around attention metrics is that attention is an outcome. The amount of time that you choose to look at something is a byproduct of the quality of the media, the quality of the creative, and the relevance of that creative to the audience. So in this way, attention is an outcome, right? It's not an input. So let's think about how these three signals contribute to attention. We've constructed the attention pathway to do this at Adelaide. And in this light, you can start to see the life cycle of an impression. And you can see how these different signals and these different vectors impact the amount of attention paid to an ad over that life cycle. In the beginning, you really want to get noticed, right? After an ad is noticed, it needs to hold attention, and then it needs to turn that attention into actual impact. At the bottom of this graph, you can see how media really impacts getting noticed, right? So in the beginning of an impression, it's up to the media to capture someone's attention, to put those eyeballs on the creative. And after that, the creative holds the attention and then delivers a branded asset that actually impacts memory. So knowing this, we want to start to understand how do you take attention metrics and use them to measure the likelihood of something getting noticed? Well, on the web, the first step we took is to understand what are the signals that predict attention. So there's some really great research out there from Amplified Intelligence and from Lumen that we use to sort of educate ourselves, to get smart about it. And that research showed us that duration and coverage and clutter and position were the 4 leading indicators of someone paying attention to an ad. So that's the first step in how we create these models at Adelaide. The first step is really getting smart about understanding the signals that are predictive of attention on any given medium. Then we take all those signals, we build a model, and then we train that model. And it feeds back, and it gets smarter and smarter over time. In this case, you can see how the AU provides a little bit more granularity than you might get with viewability or with the video completion rate, and its relative value too. So the interesting thing about using an attention metric that is focused on media and is focused on predicting the likelihood of attention is that you can expand that across all different types of media. So you can start to look at what's the relative value of TV versus radio versus print versus social. And as we roll out attention unit scores for all of those mediums, you can start to really understand the relative value of different placements. I want to take a second and go through how we actually create the AU on a medium. And so this is the AU schematic for the web. And you can start to see on the left-hand side all the different ways that we gather information that describe a placement, right? So we look for coverage and clutter and position and duration across, we gather it with the JavaScript tag. We have a page analysis tool that helps us understand the geometry of pages. We use research to understand the impact of campaigns, and that's then put back into the model to create a better and better attention unit. And then we make that data available via APIs, and we help you surface it in your reporting. So that's a brief overview of how the AU works and attention metrics. I want to thank you for your time and attention today, and hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carl Scholson. I'm a director of product and client success here at Adelaide, and really excited to be talking to you all. Thank you again to our partners at Publicis Belgium for having us today and going over some of the work that we've done together over the past few months. So we're going to talk about 4 main things. Really, we're going to start with just who Adelaide is and what the AU is. We're going to get into a AU model deep dive to talk about how we actually construct our metric. We're going to look at some examples of the AU in action, and then we're going to round it out with just a brief intro into sort of the work that we've done with the team here in Belgium over the past couple of months to develop benchmarks and begin sort of a learning agenda framework together. But to start with, very simply, just to introduce Adelaide, our goal as a company and as a business is to rate all media with a single metric that's correlated to outcomes. We call this proprietary metric the AU, or the attention unit for short. And we're going to get into all of the details around exactly how that's calculated, how we measure it, and really how it gets used. So to start with, we're going to look at the data input. What data do we take in to actually start constructing this media quality metric? So we have our own JavaScript tag and web scraper, which gives us very rich signal into the quality of the environment across various sites. We maintain eye tracking and research partnerships that gives us very rich data on what factors impact media quality and sort of the likelihood for attention in various different channels. And we can also ingest reporting from DSPs, from ad servers, and from walled gardens as well, so that we can score media quality in all of these different environments. Once we have that data in-house, and I think this is probably one of the most crucial pieces, we look at several categorical sort of buckets or collections of data points, which we refer to as facet data. So we look at things like ad coverage. How large is the ad relative to the screen it's serving on? We look at in-view duration. We capture information about interactions or engagements with the various placements and ads. We consider clutter, how many other ads might be in view competing for attention. And we look at things like proximity and position, just where on the page is the ad. All of these features have a strong impact on the likelihood for attention and on the quality of that placement. And then probably most importantly is how we take these data inputs. We extract the facet data. And the final step is really how do we train this model? How do we combine all of these features to get that singular AU score? So this is a little bit of a feedback loop where we ingest and sort of take in a lot of outcome-based data, and this can be attitudinal or survey-based data, all the way through down to conversion-based or sales data even. And we run this through a model that correlates the independent variables, things like coverage, duration, et cetera, to actual brand outcomes, so that we can rate all these different placements and channels with that singular AU score. So to get a bit further into some of the tech behind AU measurement itself, we'll start with the JavaScript plugin or tracker that we've developed here at Adelaide. So this is just a lightweight piece of JavaScript code that can get appended alongside campaign creatives or placements. And this really helps us capture information like viewability, ad coverage, in-view duration, the device type that an ad is serving on, along with other campaign-based metadata. We combine this information with data from our web scraper, which we've also developed in-house. This is a tool that provides a lot of supplemental information about the layout of pages, what other ads might be on pages, how long it takes various pages to load. And it provides a lot of the sort of additional environmental information that we need to calculate our AU metric. Once we have all of that data in-house and to get maybe a little bit deeper into the model itself, I want to talk about two main components here. So the first of those is really the outcome data that we're using to train the model. So as you can see here, we've been collecting this data for the past year and a half, nearly 2 years. And this is a data set that spans the US, German, the UK, and Australian markets. And as noted, it is comprised of both survey-based data, so things like recall, awareness, consideration, as well as more conversion-based or behavioral metrics, so on-site visits, purchases, actual sales even. And one important thing here is that we are constantly ingesting new information and new data, and we're feeding this into the model to make it more and more accurate. Once we have that data in-house and we have the training set developed, one thing that I do want to call out is we tend to provide or actually develop channel and device specific models, which get normalized into a singular ensemble model. And I think this is pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. One, this helps account for variation in data inputs that we receive for various channels, but it also helps account for differences in user behavior across these different channels. The way that you might consume media on a mobile device is going to be very different than the way that media is consumed on a television screen through connected TV, for example. So having this ensemble model really lets us capture nuances across channels, and also lets us capture differences and variation in the actual data inputs that we're capturing. But what does this all really look like at the end of the day? So we've got here just an illustration of what the AU metric actually provides us. We're looking at two video experiences here. The one on the left from just a long tail, open exchange based site, and then the one on the right from a much more premium sort of video player experience. This is from VTM specifically. And what we see here is that sort of existing or incumbent in-flight metrics, something like video completion rate, for example, is a fairly poor proxy for actual media quality. In both of these examples, the video completion rate is about 98%, which is incredibly high. But that very high video completion rate really doesn't tell us anything about the actual quality of these two experiences. Whereas with the AU, we can see that the experience on the left captures a very low AU due to high clutter, low coverage, poor position. This is a video player that just anchors itself to the bottom of the screen. And a lot of publishers are pretty strongly incentivized to create video experiences like this to make things like VCR look good. Whereas on the right with VTM, we have this very premium, high coverage, centrally located player that scores a very high average AU. And to take this just a step further, one thing we wanted to look into, and this is data that we collected with the Publicis Belgium team specifically over the past 4 or 5 months, was how does the AU correlate to something like viewability, right? It's obviously an input that we take into our model, but the AU really does extend quite a bit beyond just viewability on its own. So what we're looking at here is a sampling of about 400 different domains that we measure data on. And what we see is that the viewability rate in that sort of black trend line doesn't really correlate to the difference in AU scores that we're seeing across these different domains. And that's because, viewability on its own doesn't factor for things like in-view duration or clutter, ad coverage, or position, which the AU does. And to extend this even further, one thing that we've done quite a lot of is to run A/B tests with our partners and clients to sort of validate the utility of the AU, especially as an optimization metric. So one very standard approach that we've taken is to create an A/B test where one cell of the A/B test is split and optimized towards our AU data specifically. The other cell might be optimized towards some existing in-flight metric, video completion rate, viewability. And then at the end of the campaign, we'll measure impact, ideally through some third party. And that can take several forms: brand lift, more behavioral metrics like conversion, site actions, and even offline sales outcomes. And again, we really see utility in the AU as an in-flight proxy to correlate or drive actual brand outcomes. And what we've seen in a lot of cases is just a subset of the information or results that we've seen. But across the funnel, we see that AU optimized media tends to outperform media optimized towards viewability alone. So anything from awareness, familiarity, perception, through to purchase intent, and even actual offline sales ROI, we see that AUs are far more correlated to actual sales than something like viewability on its own. So again, as a quick recap on some of the work that we've done with Publicis in Belgium specifically, we laid out a learning agenda to help establish expectations and really make sure that we were going about this in sort of a systematic way. So the first thing that we wanted to do, obviously, was to measure data across display and online video and YouTube campaigns that were running across advertisers. We then wanted to compare and develop Belgian market specific data points and benchmarks. And then really the third step, which is ongoing and kind of an interesting and exciting next step for us, is to really validate if the AU as it's being measured and reported on correlates to brand outcomes in the Belgian market as well. So before I hand it off, I just want to talk about some very high level views into the data that we were seeing, especially when we compare sort of Belgian sites specifically to more of the global norms and benchmarks that we have for international sites. We noticed some interesting trends here, but at a high level, the sites and sort of data points we collected in the Belgian market were fairly in line with what we see elsewhere. You'll see on mobile, for example, within the Belgian market or on Belgian sites, we see slightly lower in-view duration, for example, and that has obviously a consequent effect on the AU scores there. For desktop, we see slightly more clutter on some of these sites, but again, by small margins here. But what I think this translates to most concretely is this final slide that I'll talk through, which are just a preliminary Belgium benchmarks that we've been able to create in terms of AU scores. So we see that the benchmarks for the Belgian market tend to slightly outperform what we've seen globally. So for YouTube, we see a slightly higher. For online video, it's also slightly higher. And then for display, we're seeing things be sort of quite on par with what we see globally. So with that, I will hand things off to Benoit, who's going to take a slightly deeper dive into some of the learnings that we have across publishers, campaigns, and really get a bit further into some of the data. But appreciate everyone's time here. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to Benoit.
Thank you, Carl, for this introduction on the attention unit methodology and Adelaide's approach. And hi, everyone. I'm Benoit, working at Publicis Groupe here in Belgium within the strategic intelligence team. And I'm very happy to take you through our first finding of our analysis of attention in Belgium. So these results are based on the tracking of 5 brands from a wide range of industries. So 2 FMCG, 1 entertainment, 1 pharmaceutical, and 1 household appliance brand, and over 10,000 campaigns that we tracked over 3 months, gathering more than 31 million impressions. So Carl already gave you the good news that Belgium is overperforming in terms of attention units when comparing it to the global benchmark from Adelaide. And I'm glad to tell you that when looking into it in more details, it turns out that this performance is strongly carried by the Belgian domains themselves. So when looking at the domain localization, we can see a consistent overperformance of Belgian domain versus international ones. It's a very good equation of the quality of placements offered by our local publishers and a great incentive to keep on working with them. So we then, after that first good news, of course, set out to look into more details into the results and trying to look at different dimensions that could explain or impact the difference in attention scoring. The first one being, of course, formats, trying to see whether bigger is always better. Looking at device, the answer is yes. There is a clear and strong impact of screen real estate and attention scores with desktop and tablet performing much better than mobile phone. Interestingly, desktop is overperforming slightly less for display than for online video, which could be explained by the more cluttered environment for display on desktop versus than on tablets. Now, if we go into more detail into each channel, we can see that for video, there's a strong overperformance of the 30-second formats that is almost twice as high in terms of attention unit scores than shorter formats. But if we look at the remaining format, what is interesting is that longer is not always correlated with a higher attention. So for instance, 6 seconds are performing better than 10 seconds, and the same can be said for 15 seconds versus 20 seconds in terms of absolute scoring. So it's a difference that will be even more important when factoring the cost, as we'll see later in this presentation. And as for view-through, there is unsurprisingly a correlation between VTR and attention units, as a video being played longer on screen will of course be more likely to catch the attention of the viewer. If we now look into display ad, we can say that yes, size indeed does matter, with a correlation between pixel real estate of banner ads and their attention score, and that bigger, more impactful formats such as 970 by 250 or the 1024 by 550 are top performers in terms of absolute attention scores. And we can also observe a surprisingly low performance of the 250 by 250 that is scoring at less than half of the other formats, quite surprisingly. And if size do not matter, if size do matter, clicks do not, quite unsurprisingly again, as the absence of correlation between click-through rates and attention score comes to confirm the numerous previous research that showed a lack of link between clicks and the quality in outcomes, of course. So far, we have looked into attention scores in terms of absolute, but it is of course necessary to factor in the media cost in order to have a finer understanding of how to optimize attention based on cost. So That's especially important because price is not correlated with attention unit scores. Therefore, we can't rely on CPM as an indicator of potential attention. But if we look rather at the cost per attention unit, then we can see interesting trends and further optimized attention beyond the attention scores. So the first thing, for instance, looking at the average cost per attention unit as an index, we can see that it costs more than 4 times more to purchase attention on online video than on display. Of course, we have to keep in mind that online video is achieving a much higher absolute score than display when comparing placement to placement. So it's all a matter of optimization and balance between optimizing attention score on a budget or maximizing it in absolute at every placement. And if we look into more detail into each channel, we can see that we have some interesting insights on video formats and their cost per attention unit. We have here 2 different situations. So previously, we saw that the 6-second granted more absolute attention than the 10-second, and that the same could be said for 15 and 20 seconds. But if we come and factor in the price, we add a new layer for a finer analysis. And it is indeed more interesting to purchase 15 seconds to optimize attention. It has a higher absolute attention score and a cheaper cost per attention unit than the 20-second. So it would make more sense to buy a 15-second and a 20-second. But if we look now at the 6 and 10 seconds, we can see that despite being slightly lower in terms of absolute attention unit score, the 10-second is much cheaper to purchase per attention unit than the 6-second, which would make it the more interesting formats in terms of attention optimization. So adding the cost allows us to really see how to better optimize the attention scoring throughout the media planning. And the same can be seen for display, with here an extremely strong disparity in cost per attention unit, mostly explained by the non-standard format, that is the 1024 by 550. It's similar, somewhat similar to a homepage takeover, and it has, of course, a much higher CPM than the standard formats. So when we factor in the price, we can see that the cost per attention unit of that format goes through the roof. And despite being considered as a very impactful format and sold at a premium for such reason, it does not bring higher attention score than other standard displays. So again, an interesting look into how we can optimize attention even with standard display. And looking at this standard display only, we can see again a big disparity with, for instance, the 300 by 600 and the 300 by 250 having a much cheaper cost per attention unit than the other formats. So they would be more interesting to purchase. And that despite its lower absolute score, the 250 by 250 is not cheaper in terms of cost per attention unit, confirming its strong underperformance in terms of attention. And the last dimension we looked into was context, looking at the domain on which the ads were being served. We tried to see whether the website content could impact attention scores. So when looking at it globally, we can see that entertainment websites are strongly overperformers and that the rest is rather equivalent, but it's more interesting to look at it with display and online video separated. Then we can see that performance of entertainment is mainly carried by online video, where humor and entertainment are strongly overperforming, which could be explained by the fact that it's usually a website where you have longer formats, full screen, unskippable ad placement, of course. And for display, we can see that it's more equivalent, more uniform in terms of attention scoring per context, besides quite underperformance by food and finance for display, food being underperforming also for video, so making it the lower performing context. So that was it for this first finding. So if there is 3 main takeaways to keep from this presentation, is that Belgians do it better. So we saw that context has a somewhat limited impact on the attention score, but we can definitely see that Belgian publishers offer a higher quality placement than international domain. We saw that there is no correlation between clicks and attention unit score. So it's not a direct engagement metrics. It must, on the contrary, allow us to go beyond the clicks and to use it as an indicator of the quality of an impression, really. Also, lastly, it's very important to factor in also cost and use the cost per attention unit as a new metric beyond the absolute attention score, which allow you to give new interest to placement with lower attention score, but also lower cost. And so factoring in price, reach, and attention score, we can optimize the cost per attention unit throughout the funnel. So the next step is to go from output to outcomes. So the preliminary work allowed us to observe some first trend for attention in Belgium, some interesting insights. But the next step is to go one step further and to complement this attention unit tracking with a brand lift survey in order to be able to directly measure the performance of impacts on lead generation, on sales attribution, and brand lift, overall brand performance, of course. And what will be especially interesting is to see whether it's best to maximize attention at every single placement, or if it should be optimized at the campaign level to reach the best brand impact, brand performance impact. So the later option would allow you to play more refinedly with the cost per attention unit to find the best balance between reach, attention, and ad spend. So we are, of course, looking forward to keep on exploring this methodology and to implement it into our strategic thinking and media planning further down the line. So thank you a lot for your attention. Hope you enjoy.
Hello everyone, my name is Mike Follett. I'm the Managing Director of Lumen Research. I'm here to talk to you today about some interesting attention data that we've collected on behalf of DPG in Belgium. I'm the Managing Director of Lumen. We're the world's leading attention technology company. We've developed some technology that turns this camera here or indeed this camera here, into a high quality eye tracking camera. This allows us to collect lots of data about how people actually look at things when they're online or on their phones, anywhere in the world. We collect data in the UK and in America, where we have permanent passive panels, all giving us data all day, every day, from panels of 1,000 people. But equally, we can set up more limited panels for a smaller time frame. And we do that in France, Germany, Australia, anywhere you like, including Belgium. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So our technology captures what people could see and also what they do in fact look at. And this is a very great interest for major brands, people like Tesco, Chanel, Adidas. We work with GSK. We work with all of these sorts of brands to help them buy attention, to understand what it is that people look at and therefore where they should place their ads. But increasingly, we've been working with publishers, people like TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, News UK, and now with DPG in Belgium as well, to try and help them understand what is it that really makes people engage with ads on websites, how they can improve and optimize their sites to drive attention to advertising while also maintaining the user experience. Having collected all this data, which is interesting in itself, as we'll see in a second, what we do at Lumen, and we tend to do, is turn this into predictive models of attention. These attention predictions take into account a lot of different variables. And then we can ingest data about the viewability of your advertising and estimate how much attention each and every impression got. So we've developed something that we call the Lumen Attention Measurement Platform, LAMP, L-A-M-P, and that tag can be put on your ads and estimate the level of attention it's likely to be getting. That's a post-bid technology. If you want a pre-bid technology, making it help you buy the good stuff and avoid the bad stuff, we can also deploy those. Predictive models as a plugin to a DSP. So you can use this as a contextual targeting tool to make sure that you're buying ads that are likely to get looked at and avoid buying ads that are likely to get ignored. That, of course, is very interesting for the buy side, but today is all about the sell side, trying to help us understand how different advertising works on different formats. Now, this is important for three reasons. One is, as seems obvious perhaps, but unseen is unsold. People cannot remember or act upon ads they do not look at. Now, our friends at Spotify or at the radio stations may have other opinions, and obviously there is audio attention as well. But the vast majority of advertising works with the eyes to work out, it's important to work out if anyone actually did notice this stuff. The second reason why that's important is because just because something is viewable doesn't always mean that it's viewed. People are very good at ignoring stuff. An ad can be there on the side there, winking away, but people can still ignore it. And so understanding the relationship between viewability and viewing is super important. The final reason why this is so important is because up until now, we've always had cookie data to be able to help us understand the reality of how our advertising is working or claims to that reality. That, thanks to the wonderful work of Margaret Vestager and GDPR and the effects that that's had on YouTube, on Google and on Apple, means that those third-party cookies that we've been relying on are going away. And that's important because up until now, we've been perhaps slightly too dependent on audience data, and we haven't thought enough about contextual data. And in the absence of audience data, contextual data and contextual targeting tools, like the data that I'm about to share with you now, suddenly become much more interesting. When we think about attention at Lumen, we try and think of it in terms of a funnel. At the top of the funnel are all the ads that could reach the screen. Ads that do not reach the screen at all, we can't count, we count, but we have to discard, because no one could ever look at an ad that doesn't have any pixels on the screen. We also think it's important to measure what's called technical viewability. This is a sort of a man-made artifact created by the Media Ratings Council in New York, where a committee of people have said an ad is technically viewable if it's 100% of the pixels are viewable for 1 second or 2 seconds. That's good. It's important to measure that sort of stuff, I suppose, but it isn't the real thing. All you're just measuring there is the opportunity to see. What we're interested in is if anyone did, in fact, look at it. And that's what we measure at Lumen. We measure, did anyone look at it? And then crucially, how long did they look at it for? Because as we'll see in a second, dwell time or viewing time is really, really important. So as you can see here on in the image here, we have 1,000 people who could have seen, here's the ad down here, 1,000 people, the ad appeared in front of their screen. For those people, they were going, obviously many of them were going quite quickly. So the ad perhaps wasn't viewable for very long. And so only 51% of those ad impressions were technically viewable. But it's interesting that 51 might have been viewable, but that doesn't mean that 51% of people looked at this ad. In actual fact, only 9% of people looked at the ad. So of your 1,000 ads, only 90 get looked at. And secondly, people looked at these ads for quite a short amount of time, about 1.6 seconds. This is perhaps a bit shorter than you might expect. How can anyone look at this ad? And how could you get all the information in that ad in 1.6 seconds, you might ask? And the answer is they didn't. They only looked at it for 1.6 seconds. This is the reality of attention. Now, we have found at Lumen that two numbers, the percentage looking and how long they looked at for, that's good. But people in media, they like to have one number. And they like to have that number multiplied by 1,000, cost per 1,000, and so we have attention per 1,000. What we try and imagine is you have 1,000 ads that reach the screen, 90 of those ads get looked at, 9% get looked at for 1.6 seconds. You multiply this number by this number by this number, and we can see that these ads are generating about 148 seconds of attention per 1,000 impressions. Now, this is important because I'm going to use this idea of attentive seconds per 1,000 right the way through this presentation to make sure that we have a consistent metric again and again. Now, this data here comes from the UK, but what the guys at DPG were interested in is how does this work in Belgium? And so we set up a temporary panel of about 750 Dutch-speaking respondents in Belgium, nationally representative. And we asked them to view a number of websites and explore lots of different websites. And we were able to control the advertising that they saw for a number, I think 5 or 10 Belgian brands, so that if there were differences in the attention patterns across websites, it was not because of the creative, it was because of the impact of the sites and the publisher itself. So we held the creative constant. Having asked people to visit these sites and be exposed to lots of advertising and perhaps look at some of it, we then said, thank you very much, stop the eye tracking, and then we asked people a short questionnaire afterwards to assess their recall of the brands that were there, their attitudes to the brands, their likelihood to recommend the brands or their intention to purchase. And here are just some of the images that we got out of that and some of the formats that we tested. So the guide, so the first thing it says is to just to look at the drivers of attention in general, and then we'll talk about HLN in a second. And rather than go through everything laboriously, I thought perhaps it would be better to build on what we know already. We are the research company that helped do the Dentsu Attention Economy project, which you may have heard about and which I believe is coming to Belgium soon. Within this project, which is using a very similar methodology to the one that we did for DPG, we did it in 2 countries, in the UK and the US, and got 3,000 people in Britain, 3,000 people in America to conduct very similar studies as we've done here. From that, we were able to see which ads get looked at, but also isolate the specific drivers that make people notice advertising. So when your ads are on screen, they always take up. They're always on screen for a certain amount of time, and they're always taking up a certain amount of space, and they're either static or video or whatever. But we were able to say, well, what are the most important drivers? What are the relative impact of each of these drivers? And from the Dentsu study, we've been able to see that the most important thing is viewable time. If the ads are on screen for a very long time, then they get more attention than if they're on screen for just a short amount of time as people scroll past. Secondly, forced viewing is very important. If the ad is skippable or unskippable, and how long the ad is its playtime. Movement is very important. So if the ad is static or video, the size of the ad is quite important, and how much it takes across the screen. And then finally, device. Ads on mobile phones tend to get more attention than ads on desktop computers in general. So those are the sort of broad drivers of attention, are the sorts of things that drive our predictive models, if you're interested in that. But what we thought would be interesting is to say, well, these are probably the drivers that work in Belgium as well, but what are the things that specific learnings about Belgian media that might be greater or lesser than this in Belgium? And there seem to be sort of 3 things from this study that we thought were particularly interesting. The first is that the more you engage with the content itself, and the slower the engagement with the media, the more attention goes to the advertising. This is something that we've seen elsewhere, but it seems to be particularly apparent in Belgium. Secondly, bigger is better when it comes to advertising. We saw previously that size of ad and the amount of space it takes up on the screen is important, but it seems to be particularly the case in the studies that we've done in Belgium. And then finally, the commitment of readers to a particular publisher seems to be very important as well. So I'm going to talk about these three things, and then I'll talk about HLN results relative to other media at the end. So the first thing to note is that the way in which people engage with sites makes a very, very big difference to how they engage with advertising. High quality journalism, and I count HLN within that, seems to get looked at, is engaged with for a far greater amount of time than the way people scroll quite quickly on Facebook or what you might call task-based sites. And what we can see here in general is that the slower the scroll speed, the more attention the advertising receives. So when people are scrolling quite slowly, they notice the ads and the attentive seconds per 1,000 impressions goes up. When they're scrolling very quickly, the attentive seconds go down, which stands to reason, makes sense, huh? This seems to be the case for pretty much all websites, and is also the case for HLN. But it's interesting that ads on HLN seem to get quite a lot of attention, even at quite fast paces. The second way of thinking about this is how intensely people are engaged with the content itself, and how the intensity of content engagement influences attention to the ads. And again, the more deeply and committed you are to reading things, the more closely you're actually reading things on your phone, the more you are likely to also notice and engage with the ads. HLN, again, seems to be slightly outperforming the norm on that regard, but the general shape is the same. Third sort of way of thinking about this issue is just the rather more boring idea of just viewable time. Viewable time is super, super important. The longer the ad is in view, the more attention it is likely to get, and that's a fairly slightly boring linear relationship. Again, it's just interesting to note that HLN seems to be very good at converting viewable time into actual viewing. The second big thing that we were talking about was about ad size. We previously saw from the Dentsu study that a bigger is better, but when it comes to Belgium, this seems to be taken to the next level. The large formats that we tested as part of this study get tons more attention than the standard formats on both desktop and on mobile. I think it's worth just noting that this learning is consistent with what we found elsewhere, but it does seem to be more extreme on Belgian websites and for these high impact formats in particular. And then the third thing that makes a difference that we found amongst all the other stuff that we found is about the commitment of readers. We did this study amongst 750 normal Belgians, old and young, rich and poor. We did not recruit these people to be regular readers of HLN. However, HLN is a big website. It reaches a lot of people. It would be unusual had we not got any HLN readers within that sample. And that was quite lucky for us because we were able to cut the data by how committed you were to reading HLN. And it seems from this that if you read the website daily, you're more likely to notice the ads, but only a little bit. Nothing very significant here in terms of whether you look at them at all. But you spend an awful lot more time actually engaging with the site. And people seem to spend more time, between half a second here and 0.6 per second, and obviously a much greater percentage increase there. And that means that the attentive seconds per 1,000 you get from committed readers is much, much greater than for people who viewed it less frequently, which I think is really, really interesting. People spend more time on ads on their website. And that's a new finding that we think is really, really important. It's important because the longer you spend looking at the ads, the more likely you are to remember them. Sometimes, a short amount of attention can work just for bringing things top of mind. In terms of prompted ad awareness, getting people to choose from a list of brands that may have been advertising, which ones of these names do you remember seeing? Even a small amount of attention can influence that. But if you really want to get people to remember your ads, you really do have to make sure that they spontaneously remember them. You do need quite a chunk of time to get that done. And that's very consistent with what we found in previous studies, and that's reassuring because what we've also found in previous studies, not in this study, we didn't do this question in this study, but for previous studies, is that more attention and attention in general links to people's likelihood to choose one brand over another in a subsequent choice exercise. What we've been able to see is that when people are given a choice of brands that they choose afterwards, if the ads were not viewable or not viewed, then there's no real impact, as you might imagine, if you don't look at the ads and they're not viewable. If the ads are viewable but not looked at, again, there's no difference there. If the ads are viewed, but for a very short amount of time, because the ads are shooting past very quickly and are not technically viewable, again, very little impact on choice there. The only thing that influences choice for brands is actual attention. Viewable ads that are viewed. That is what counts when it comes to getting people to choose brand A over brand B. And it isn't just about choice, it's also about sales. So using the LAMP tag, the Lumen Attention Measurement Platform tag in the UK, we've been able to show clients that the ads that we predict are likely to be generating lots of attention are also the ones that are actually generating lots of sales. Attention leads to sales. It leads to recall. It leads to brand choice, but importantly, it leads to action as well. And this is why attention is such an important metric to measure. To conclude then, I just wanted to put some of the HLN data into a broader context here. What we were able to do is, again, looking at this attentive seconds per thousand thing, is look at the different formats that HLN have and how they compare to other things. This is for the desktop data, which shows that these high impact takeovers are generating as much and sometimes more than sort of pre-roll advertising from the likes of Google, and obviously much more than the social media networks, which is interesting. Even the sort of standard formats also seem to be performing well versus the competition. This means that when all things are taken equally, the attentive seconds per thousand from a typical HLN page is in the top 25%, in the top quartile of websites globally. Sort of perhaps not quite as good as Men's Health or Cosmo, but better than Lonely Planet or Vice or Le Figaro. When we do the same thing again for mobile, again, the high impact formats seem to be performing very well. This extra social ads seems to be doing slightly better than the social media providers, and even the standard ads seem to be performing well as well. And that puts HLN mobile in the top third of domains. Again, in the same sort of region as Der Spiegel and Die Zeit and New, but slightly better than Gardener's World or Yahoo. So what does that mean for advertisers then? Well, to conclude, I just say this. We said at the start that just because something is viewable doesn't mean it's viewed. I think we've seen some quite compelling evidence to say that that's true. But we've also seen some evidence to show that view time is key. The longer you look at ads, the more likely they are to work. And these are the measures that people should be taking seriously. We also know that not all publishers are created equal. The same ad can do very differently on different websites. And so it isn't simply a matter for buyers to get the ad out there, but where they put the ad is equally important. And some of the factors that we've talked about today make a difference to that. But the final thing is, what do you do as a result of this? Well, we would say perhaps think about your attention strategy, how you measure attention and how you buy attention. Thanks to the work that DPG has done, this sort of data is now available in Belgium via the Lumen system. We can apply our tags to help you measure attention, or we can deploy our custom algorithms to help you buy attention. However, long years of doing this has taught me that people do not really like advertising and they don't like being sold to. So I will stop with the ad for Lumen and I will leave you there. Thank you very much for your time and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody, for all the presentations. Really great work and really exciting progress being made on the attention metrics front. I'm Zach Kubin. I am the head of revenue here at Adelaide, and really excited to be doing a roundtable here with some of the folks that you see here on the screen. So before we get started, I think we'll do a little round of intros with everybody here that's joining us for the roundtable, and then we'll get started with some questions. So Matthias, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, Zach. I'm Matthias Langenaker. I'm the strategic intelligence lead at Publicis Groupe, which actually means that with our small team, within the bigger strategic team of the entire group in Belgium, we are responsible for a couple of things. For in the first place, media strategy, but also everything that goes about marketing effectiveness, data and market research. So that's a bit my background. I have been a digital planner as well in the past, so this is something that is close to my heart as well.
So my name is Bernd Struiven. I'm a digital researcher of the sales organization of DPG Media. And an important part of my job that consists of setting up research projects, on the one hand, that emphasizes strength of our media channels and our ad formats. But on the other hand, these research projects, they educate, and their insights, of course, they educate the market as our insights, they transcend, of course, our own brands.
So I'm Aurore de Vos. I'm managing the digital marketing team for the Walt Disney company Benelux. But I'm here as a paid media expert since I've been in media agencies for ages and working in paid media in the Belgian market for ages as well.
That'll be part of the prize at the end of the session. Is we'll have a guessing game. No, we're not going to do that. So I think that a lot of this came as a result of some of the work that the folks at Publicis has put together. And so I think Matthias, we'll start with you. For the people on the phone and for everybody listening, I mean, can you give a sense of where this project started? How did Publicis start to identify the need for attention metrics, and give your perspective on sort of where this all began and where you currently are in this process?
Yeah, I think for us it started already a while ago, when I think one of the first things that we were maybe frustrated about was that we had the notion that an impression in digital, it doesn't mean a lot. It's something that is usable as a gross reach number, but it doesn't mean a lot. It's not comparable with other media. It makes it very difficult to compare digital media with offline media, with television, with out of home, all these kinds of things. They're measured in different ways with different currencies. And on the other hand, it makes it even difficult to compare within digital all kinds of different things, because digital is such a catch-all term that it comprises a lot of different things. And I think if there's one of the main things that we saw also from Benoit's presentation, is that there is absolutely no correlation between CPM and attention units. So that also means that an impression doesn't necessarily hold the impact of an ad. So that was I think the main point. I think a second thing was that, of course, with the depreciation of third-party cookies, we're on the lookout for what the alternatives could be. And there's been a lot of talk about contextual targeting, and I think it's rightly so, because contextual targeting, it's not something new, I think, in media, especially for those who have worked in media for a long time. But maybe in digital, we lost it a bit because of the notions of audience buying. We forgot that context has an important impact on how ads are perceived and how they work. And the only thing is, I think what we shouldn't do in the future when we talk about context is that we only focus on keywords, and that we only focus on what is the exact content of where we are placing our ad, and how is there a link between the brand and, you know, putting food brands in recipes and these kinds of things. I think it's very important to think about how are people consuming the content and the media, and I'm a big believer of Ferris Jacobs' idea of slow and fast media and how they correlate with high attention and low attention. And I think there we were also looking for something that in real time can give us an insight on how attention works and how different kinds of media are consumed and what that can mean for our ads. So I think that was more or less the starting point for us.
Bernd, can you tell me a little bit about how DPG is looking at using attention metrics to sort of create consumer experiences for the people that use your content, so that advertisers like Matthias are able to buy media with an expectation that it's capturing attention?
Yeah, of course, because I think we can use it in multiple ways in which we can distinct ourselves from other publishers, or in which other publishers they can use it as well. But because for us, first of all the attention data of DPG Media online channels that we have now collected the past year of our recent experiment with Lumen and the VTM Go experiment last year, it is to a large extent exclusive DPG Media data. But with this unique and local attention data, where we also benchmark ourselves with other major players, we can emphasize our strengths and keep improving our ad offer. So that is one thing that where we use attention data for, or we can enrich the experience or enrich and insights for clients. Secondly, we plan to use these insights because we are now starting a next phase after the knowledge phase. We plan to use the insights of our research in future campaign reporting and analysis. As a research with Lumen, it enables us, for example, to create an attention model that consists of our own data. So this campaign reporting, this will be a lot more easy when we have like a model with our own data, of course. And thirdly, this is nothing for now, I guess. But we certainly plan it as well. The insights and the data, they encourage us. It encourages us to use attention or attention-linked parameters in our commercial offer, for example, in the form of a new buying model, thus to use attention as a currency, actually. But I can't give any more specific details about it at this stage. But when it arrives, we will not only distinguish ourselves or any publisher that would use it, it will distinguish itself from other publishers in the data and the insights of own local channels we can share with our clients, but also in the reporting and in the ad buying.
Yeah, I think attention as a currency, obviously for those who are unaware, I'm here in the States. Attention as a currency is something that people are starting to talk about. It's sort of evolving the idea of buying just impressions and hoping that it captures some sort of value. I think, Aurore, from your perspective, how do you see advertisers making use of attention for a strategic advantage? Can you walk us through a little bit more about some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that attention is more key than ever because the consumer is, subject to many stimulus. There is a clutter in advertising. There is a clutter in media, in solicitation, and plus the consumer are multitasking. Checking their phone while watching TV, while having the iPad open with something on it. So really a busy consumer, but also a consumer super demanding. And us as advertiser, we need to kind of stand out of the crowd. We need to entertain them, not only inform them, but entertain them and take their attention. And that's why the KPI of attention, the currency of attention is really important. I think that we can come up with the best media plan ever with the right phasing, the right targeting. But still, if we do not have a spirit behind it, if we do not attract attention, if we do not have the right message that stands out on the right context, and I agree with you, Matthias, it's really important, the context. It's really an old internet 1.0 media planning way of thinking, but it's really key nowadays, because if we get that attention, we will get our seat at the table, and we will ultimately get the consumer consider us and ultimately convert. So that's key, and that's not revolutionary, that's not new, that's really advertising 1.0. But yeah, back to the good old recipes, I think.
Yeah, there's an interesting sort of shift that, for the last 15 years, I think advertisers have been very focused on targeting at audiences. And I think, certainly in Europe with GDPR, that is becoming a little bit more challenging. Some of the steps that Google and Apple are taking towards deprecating cookies, and Matthias, you mentioned this, there's going to need to be a reconsideration of sort of the old school thinking about how advertising has been proven to work for 100 years. All of a sudden, digital comes around, everybody wants to do micro-targeting, and maybe that isn't the right solution. Yeah, I think, Matthias, to that point, what do you think that agencies or marketers have to gain by looking at more precise forms of media measurement? I mean, how does this sort of help the industry evolve from where it's been over the last 15 years or so?
There's a lot to unpack, I think, in your question. I think the main point, and it's something that we already discussed, and that I think we got back to in Benoit's presentation as well, is that we need to move from outputs to outcomes. I think our advertisers as well are more demanding than ever in making their media and their media investments work for them. And also, one of the big shifts I think that is happening and that I feel on our side is that where a couple of years ago, especially in digital, budgets were given to us and an advertiser briefed us on, this is your budget, this is what you work with. And we're really witnessing a shift towards, you tell us what the ideal budget is. And that means that we need to show and improve how media work and what the outcomes are. And I think it's a semantic discussion, but if I'm talking about outputs and outcomes, for us, things like GRPs, impression, clicks, even video views, they are outputs. They're products of advertising. They're not real impact for brands in the real world, whether it's on their brand lift or sales or whatever. So I think going into these kinds of new types of measurement, new metrics that are closer, and this is the research that you guys have done, and this is what we want to do as a next step as well in Belgium, is to prove that these things are closer to real brand impact and to outcomes. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to start defining what are the media metrics that we can use, because these are the things that we measure in real time, and we can't always measure market share, brand lifts, and those kinds of things in real time. What can we measure in real time that are good proxies of real impact for our advertisers? And I think that's the biggest move. I think this is why it's also very interesting what is happening now, because we're moving into something very practical. I think that's a good thing.
I agree there with Matthias. He talks about output and outcomes. I talk about always the shift from the delivery metric to more the consumption or the processing metrics, where attention lies more compared to, for example, the impression or the cost metrics, CPM linked to that. But I agree as a local media player, I guess we like this transition, or we hope that this transition keeps going, more focused on these more quality metrics as well, because I guess we will take the most advantage from it as well. Also, when this attention measurement, this quality attention measurement is widely adopted, because we know that this quality, this premium environments, that these content sites with slower scrolling speed, they all lead to more attention and impact for ads. And that will help as well to shift from these more quantity-focused metrics, where I guess like big international players, they are often very strong in their offers there. So a bigger focus on these quality parameters, these more the outcomes, such as attention, will be surely welcomed by local players like us. And an evolution to more attention measurement, it will also oblige us as media players, as publishers, to improve our ad offer. And this can be a win-win for both publishers and the agencies and advertisers, of course.
Something we talk a lot about is incentives, right? And I think that what you two and or what you're also talking about as well is the market incentives currently dictate tonnage and volume and cost reductions and efficiencies, right? And for a publisher like DPG, if there's a premium associated with the content because of the nature of your publisher, of who you are as a publisher, just saying, hey, we can get you the cheapest impressions and the cheapest clicks, like what's the value to the advertiser, right? And I think as this sort of evolution towards connecting the inputs to the outcomes shows that maybe higher attentive media drives better outcomes. Publishers like DPG only stand to gain from that. I think, Aurora, maybe passing this to you, because it sounds like you've had experience in this field, what are the ways in which you think, or what advice do you have for brands that are considering incorporating attention metrics? And I think from a brand perspective, some of the challenges that I think in working with Matthias and others that brands just move a little bit slower, right? They're larger, they're more deliberate, and I think for all the reasons you can understand. Is there a framework that you've put into place to say, hey, here's how we're going to test and learn, here's how we're going to evaluate, if you're speaking with a brand?
The thing is that, and I'm seeing also, it's more a remark towards what was said before. I see that advertisers are kind of schizophrenic, with, on one hand, wanting to have all those brand KPI in the green, getting the attention and getting ultimately more conversion, but on the other hand, squeezing the media and squeezing the media agencies to have more discounts and, the cheapest click, the better. So I think it's also the advertisers should have a look at how they brief and how they want things coming. But now to your question, I think that advertiser first of all needs to define media KPI before everything, because it's sometimes really difficult as well, because we received objectives, and we've received objectives from our bosses, business objectives that we need to translate into media objectives, and then it's the other way around, with the results, translating the media results into brand results. So I think that first of all we need to, with media KPIs, have things more clear, and again back to good old recipes. Few KPIs. We do not need to overcomplicate the thing, having 10 different KPIs. We already have enough touch points with different KPIs. So it's really branding. We need to be seen. We need to act on viewability, view-through rate, and so on. Maybe engagement when we are on social media. Performance, it's conversion. So that's the thing. And then we have the brand KPIs, of course. And I think that the attention KPI, the attention currency, is really, for me, some kind of missing link, some kind of a thing in between that will, ultimately translate what we have done in media, the results of the media, into the branding results, because this link is something that we are missing. It's really kind of difficult to attribute the success of a campaign to the success of the brand. Sometimes we miss that link, and attention metrics can be one thing that solve the problem.
This is something that we experience a lot, is the idea that whenever we work with a brand, or not when but we hear this from brands a lot, if we ever present them with data from Adelaide that shows that a given strategy or tactic is below benchmark, they panic. To your point, Aurora, it's like everything has to be above benchmark. And we're like, well, it's not really how statistics work, but sure, there's always an argument that nobody wants to see sort of bad results. But I think the idea of what I think you're suggesting is that, like, to take a little bit of a leap to testing and learning, the benefit of testing and learning is that you'll learn. And not everything you learn is necessarily going to be great, but at least for the future. Matthias, what's your perspective on sort of agencies' roles in bringing brands along for experimenting with new solutions like attention metrics, right? And the reason that I'm directing this towards you is because we've been able to work together over the last few months and kind of getting some buy-in towards a few sets of brands. And we don't have to name names, but help me understand, help people on the phone understand, how did you sell this in, right? What was the promise, and what was the outcome, and what was the reception that you got? I mean, was there, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever, or hey, we want to learn more about this? Can you help us understand that a little bit?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things, and I think that this is also the process that we have walked through with you guys, there's no surprise, and I think it's something I can speak to, is that we shifted strategies a couple of times, and because we really believed in this, but we felt, and I think this is maybe due to the Belgian market and also part of what people expected from us, but in the beginning we had some difficulties in getting this off the ground and proving that this is something that you should invest in as a brand, or that it does lead, because we didn't have any proof, we didn't have any data, nothing localized. I think also if you look into, we worked with you guys, we started talking about a year ago, I guess. If you see the evolution you guys have made in terms of the campaigns that you run and those kinds of things, there's a lot more proof now for what you're doing than what we had a year ago. So eventually what we said was, we need to start creating the proof ourselves. We need to start doing campaigns, just tracking campaigns, and just see what comes out of it. And this is what is going to help our advertisers in seeing the value of what we're doing. So that's eventually what we did. And that's how we came up with the first test of 3 months that we presented, where we just ran a couple of the main campaigns that we had. And we started looking into what are the dynamics that are happening here. But there's still a lot of things I think for us, there's a lot of next steps as well. And if you're talking about test and learn, and if I hear Aurore speaking about what this means to brands, we still have a lot of questions as well. And I think that's also why we presented the next steps. It's always a very nuanced story, and it's easy to sell things that are black and white. One of the main questions that we still have is, are we going to maximize attention units per impression, or are we going to maximize attention units on a campaign level, for instance? What is the main goal that we're having? And these kinds of things need to be tracked also to get answers. One of the main questions that we still have is, can an easily recalled and recognizable brand cope with low attention impressions? Because the idea, if you have your distinctive brand assets in place, if you're really a big brand in the market, in theory, you should be able to cope with lower attention. That doesn't mean you need to accept lower quality, but in theory you should. But this is something we don't know, so that's next on the test and learn process for us.
Barrett, you sit in a research function at your job. I don't imagine you're doing much selling, so to speak. But what from a research perspective, how are you thinking, or how is DPG thinking about educating brands and agencies on this sort of newer topic of attention? Is there a plan in place beyond the research that you've done with folks like Lumen?
Yeah, the insights we want to we have from our research to educate our clients is, first of all, for more specific research we have conducted now at Lumen, is that quality content, it delivers more attention, because one of the things also that we have seen is that multiple quality proxies that also boost attention for ads, like the viewable time or the viewed time or the scroll speed. So that is something that we have seen. And besides that, the ad size also plays a role. And that brings us to one of the next key findings of our research, that not all display formats are equal. And in the first place, we see differences between, we saw a difference between high impact formats and standard display formats. And we also found, as an extra, very good results for extra social formats, by the way. That proves that the display doesn't deserve, that's the most important thing, that display doesn't deserve a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's something also that we wanted to show. Besides that, furthermore, we saw that HLN display ads, they score also very well compared to international benchmarks. Now we're talking about benchmarks again. But ultimately, our research, it confirms again that attention drives impact.
Large brands with large marketing organizations require lots of different stakeholders to buy into a new approach, right? I mean, there are legacy metrics that models have been built on over years, if not decades of research. Is there any guidance that you might have, or an approach that you might suggest to sort of identify key stakeholders in an organization, whether it's research or analytics, or in some cases, we even talk to people in procurement about understanding how new metrics might benefit them holistically in an organization?
I think it's having the right balance between, because you are talking about large organization, I think it's having the good balance between what is developed on an international level, but for sure, and this is something on which I instead for sure, having local specialists giving their advice and giving the feeling about the market, because we are talking about for sure KPIs and metrics and principles that are used worldwide, but still in a specific market like Belgium, some KPIs might be more important than others. So it's more kind of finding the balance between the great findings that has been done in the States, for example, but at some point they cannot be applied locally. So we need to find, to translate it properly into something more local, even if it's, main and plain marketing advertising.
It's interesting, we from our perspective, we hear this a lot. What is my local market? What are the insights we have around attention? And like Matthias and I suggested with Belgium, we've done this with Bernd as well. What are some insights we have in the Belgian market relative to a global norm or relative to another market? And there is a slight amount of variance, but the thinking here is that, like, at some point, to your point, you want to start to evolve a local market understanding of how this impacts the way in which you want to do business. And I think what Bernd had mentioned 15 minutes or so about creating a marketplace, and we don't have to get into it, but the idea that you start to set up the right set of incentives for the market to transact on meaningful metrics, that should benefit brands that are looking to drive better outcomes as a result. I think a question that I want to ask everybody, and I think that we could probably wrap after this, is what is the future for attention metrics? We've kind of have this little foothold where there's becoming an increasing amount of interest in the market around attention metrics. So, give me your perspective a year from now or 2 years from now. Where do you think we'll be? And maybe Bernd, I'll start with you. We can just go around the table from there.
Yeah, I already mentioned it for a bit, but I think in like 1 or 2 years we will evolve more. First of all, in using attention in reporting, as a KPI for campaigns, and in the farther future, I hope I say it correctly like that. I think, like you already said, using attention as a currency, as a buying model integrated in the ad servers. Stuff like that, and then ultimately, I guess I think, and we might talk about like 5 years here. I think, attention will be self-evident and will be fully integrated in campaign reporting and buying. And when this is the case, and I'm pretty sure that it will be the case. Once in the future, I'm sure that the market will start looking also for a new golden parameter that will confirm the quality and the impact of local publishers and broadcasters and further increase the importance of them in digital. What this golden parameter is, that I can't say.
Well, we're talking about 5 years in the future, so we have a little time to figure out what is the golden parameter. Matthias, you have any thoughts on kind of the evolution of where we are now versus, let's say in a couple of years?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest steps is what we have taken in the last year. If you compare what has been done in terms of attention research, even also the work that Bernd and his colleagues did, and also some of our competitors did very interesting research, but very static research about attention in the last couple of years. Where now all of us, and I think that's what brought DPG Media and us together on this as well, is we want to move to something very practical, something that we can use. Something that we can not only use in reporting, but also in our negotiations with our media partners, that we can start even maybe in an ideal world, start building private deals and packs in programmatic on to move from a very strategic to a very tactical and practical thing. And I think I agree with Bernd in that the goal should be and then to deliver a more quality environment for everyone, for advertisers, for publishers, and for consumers, and that's what everyone profits from that.
Aurora, your thoughts on kind of the future of where we are? Yeah.
Yes, I really, if I am the fairy of the attention KPI, just on the crib of the attention KPI, I really hope that there is in the future a switch of mentality towards more simplicity and a true usage of that KPI, having it used beyond Publicis and beyond DPG, but on the entire market, and having every marketeer on board to use it more often, because I really think that's a crucial missing link that will enlighten us a lot.
Yeah, I think simplicity, when you're trying to change the way in which an industry has functioned for a period of time, it does need to be very easy. Right? You can't just walk in there and say, we're going to do attention, but here's how complicated it's going to be. I think that there's a lot of learnings that we've been able to accrue over the last 5 or 6 months of working with some of the folks on this chat together. We really appreciate the time. Matthias, Bernd, Aurora, thank you so much for joining us for this roundtable. It was great. And thank you all for joining us. Good to see you.
Thanks.
It was a pleasure.
Bye.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you, Zach.